Call the meeting to order. It is now 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday, October 18th, for the Committee of Adjustment meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone or ask everyone to take any mobile devices they have and switch them off or put them in silent mode. And I would also like to remind everyone that the proceedings today are being recorded and streamed live on the Georgian Bay Township website. And a copy of these proceedings, or a copy of that video, is available online if you wish to see this or previous meetings. In order to support that, we have a number of microphones throughout the room, and in order to get a good quality recording, we all need to speak into the microphone. And I should tell you that there's some microphones over the gallery area there that pick up voices. So I'd ask if you have any conversations, either keep them at a very low tone, or you're welcome to go in and out as you please if you need to have a conversation. If you are asked to address the committee, I would ask that you step forward to one of these microphones that are on the desk in front of you. There's a little button there, you'll press it and the end of it will light up, and that way we'll get a good recording. Before we begin the meeting, I would also like to introduce our new acting Secretary Treasurer, and I have a resolution here to recognize our new secretary, or acting secretary treasurer, in the absence of our previous secretary treasurer. So I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment appoints Nicole, the acting deputy clerk, as the acting secretary treasurer in the absence of the secretary treasurer. All those in favor? The motion is carried. This morning there's a public meeting scheduled for 7 minor variances. I'll just briefly summarize the procedure that we will use for the meeting today. Firstly, the Secretary Treasurer will advise everyone as to when, how, and to whom notice of the applications was sent. We'll then consider each of the applications separately. The planning staff will advise the purpose and effect of the applications and provide any information that is relevant. The Secretary Treasurer will advise if there's any correspondence on the file. And from there, the applicant or their agent, if they're present, can make an application, make a presentation on the application. And we will then move to the public. If you are asked to speak, I would ask, as mentioned, step up to the microphone. If you've already sent in a letter or an email about the application, there's no need to read it over because we've all had an opportunity to review it. But please step up to the microphone and provide your comments. Once the public part of the meeting is over, we'll bring the application before the committee, who will decide either to accept, defeat, or defer the application. The minor variance applications that are being considered this morning are A19-31 for 119 John Buchler Rd, number 2, A19-38 for 397 Websters Lane. Number 3 is A19-39 for 93 Peninsula Trail. 4 is A19-40 for 85 Clerks Rd. 5 is A19-41 for 18 Island 340 Severn River. Number 6 is A19-42 for 450 Whites Falls Road. And number 7 is A19-44 for 4430 Go Home Lake. And we also have one that was deferred at a previous meeting that we'll be bringing forward as well.
Meters, and to those persons and agencies likely to have an interest in the application. The notice was sent The notices were sent at least 20 days prior to this morning's meetings. Included in each notice was an explanation of the purpose and effect of the application and a key map showing the location of the property. Other relevant information may also have been provided. These circulations were provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act 1990.
Thank you. Our first application is A19-31, and to the planner, please.
Good morning. So the first application you have 0.2 meters, where 8 meters is permitted, and a 10-meter setback to the deck, as well as to permit the construction of a 2-story detached garage, the zone setbacks, which is 10 meters, rather than the accessory setbacks, which are 4 meters. As well as the detached garage is requesting a height of 5.4 meters, where 5 meters is permitted for a 2-story detached garage. As you can see, the subject lands on the screen, shown in black. It is zoned shoreline residential type 1 and designated waterfront in both the township and district official plan. The subject lands is on the Trent Severn, and it is just off of Whites Falls Road. As you can see, the aerial imagery shown, the subject lands is shown in red, where you can see the existing development, and it is developed close to the water currently. All right, so just to show you the survey of what's being proposed. So as you can see, the existing cottage located down at the water. The existing cottage is approximately 4 meters to the water, and the deck at approximately 1.5 meters. So they are proposing to pull the cottage back and construct the detached garage at the rear of the property, just on the other side of John Buchler Rd, which is a private road. So just to give you a better idea of the proposed cottage, so as you can see, the closest point is to a covered deck of that 8.9 meters. The cottage is 402 square meters with a walkout basement and a loft. And they would be permitted to expand this existing cottage based on section 411 in our zoning bylaw, but instead they've chosen to move the dwelling back as far as possible. And you will see the steep slope in the site photos that I have coming up. And this is the topographical survey, so just showing where their septic is. It is located beyond the 30-meter setback. It may need to be expanded slightly. It's located here. It may need to be expanded slightly, but it will be able to be expanded within compliance with the zoning bylaw. Just to give you some site photos, so this is where the garage will be located. The garage location, looking at the rear of the lot line. And another garage location photo. This is the garage location, and as you can see, there is mature vegetation surrounding it. So this is the rear looking towards that abutting property where they're requesting the setback of 4 meters. So it does drop off here. There is a steep slope at the rear of the detached garage. The lot that abuts it is zoned open space, so it would not permit any residential development. And currently it's vacant. So the garage won't negatively impact the abutting landowner. The increase in height is due to the topography. As you can see, there is some varying elevations. And the intent of allowing a 2-story garage is to consolidate buildings rather than having a separate garage and sleeping cabin. They'll be consolidated into one building. So this is standing at the garage location looking towards the shoreline. This is where the existing cottage is. So as you can tell, there is a steep slope. And this is the rear of the proposed cottage towards the shoreline. So the rear elevation is about 185.5 Canadian geodetic data. And the front elevation, so I do have some other photos showing that slope, is 183, so about a 2.5 meter difference. This is that proposed cottage location. So as you can see, there is that increase in slope there. This is the cottage location, so standing on the pathway that they have down to the water. This is the existing cottage. As you can see, it is right on the water. So a recommendation of approval is that this area where the cottage currently exists be revegetated. This is looking at the shoreline and the existing boathouse to remain. A view to the east, a view to the northeast. As you can see, the character of the area is cottages close to the water. The view to the north. This is standing on the dock looking towards the existing cottage, and behind it will be the proposed cottage. This is the deck location, so this tree may need to be removed. So that's why it's important that where the existing cottage is be revegetated. This shows that increase in topography. Another view of the proposed cottage location is, as you can see, there is a steep slope. So they're utilizing the existing topography and enclosing the basement rather than having it built on piers. Again, the proposed cottage location. So as you can see, it is the only location. It can't be pushed back any farther. The septic is on the top of that hill, so they wouldn't be able to put the proposed cottage there. And another view of that steep slope. And a view to the shoreline, or a partial view to the shoreline from the proposed cottage. Just to give you an idea of what the cottage will look like. So it will have a loft and a walkout basement. The intent of the height provision is to limit scale and visual impact and to ensure the aesthetic quality of the waterfront area is protected. So the increase in height is due to the steep slope of the topography of the land. The dwelling will not exceed the existing tree canopy. So this is that main floor. So this will be as you come in off the driveway. It will be flat on grade, so you would enter there. So they're utilizing that existing topography, as you can see in this photo here. This shows the slope. So the intent of the front yard setback is to ensure structures are adequately set back from the shoreline and to ensure the character of the area is protected. The steep topography limits the buildable area, and revegetating the shoreline will reduce the visual impact. So just to give you an idea of the floor plan, this is the basement. It's for storage mechanical. No bedrooms in the basement. And the main floor. So the cottage will be 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bath. And the loft is just a partial loft, about 600 or 800 square feet. Not the full second story. There will be an open area to below. And just to show you that garage with the sleeping cabin. So it will also not exceed the existing tree canopy. Main floor of the garage, and the second floor, which does comply with the size requirements of a sleeping cabin. It's about 594 square feet. So the dwelling and the garage meet the 4 tests under the Planning Act. The applicant has selected the only locations for development on the subject lands. It does not negatively impact the aesthetic quality of the waterfront community. So staff are in support of the application. The applicant is here if you have any questions for himself or if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Dana. Does the applicant have anything they'd like to add to what Dana provided? Nothing to add, okay. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to this application? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring the application before the committee, and starting with Member Bocek. Do you have any questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Member Ferguson?
The walkout basement, is that available for development for putting in additional bedrooms or at some future point, or is there a restriction upon that?
To Member Ferguson. So their zoning doesn't have restrictions on gross floor area, so if they wanted to put a bedroom in the basement, they would just have to ensure their septic had the capacity for that.
Thank you, Dana.
Okay. Member Matthews?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Member Ferguson sort of answered one of my questions because I was a little concerned. It appears to be over 4,000 square feet of cottage. Is that correct, Dana? 4,400 square feet or something or other? I think you had 410 square meters.
402 square meters.
Okay, so there is no restriction on the square footage in this area.
Not in this zone, no.
Okay. Could you answer one other question for me then too, Dan? Just the lot area, you have over 3,000 hectares, which in my calculation is like 7,600 acres. And I'm wondering if there's a typo there.
Yes, there definitely is. That should have said square meters. Sorry about that.
Square
So
meters.
3,090.15 square meters, not hectares.
Okay. I did visit the site, and it definitely appears to be the only place to build that. You need to be a billy goat to get down to the existing cottage, so it seems like a reasonable location to me.
Member Demke.
Thank you. Yeah, I visited the site as well. It's actually pretty well marked out, lots of blasting. I thought I might need my mountain climbing boots to get up the one side, but it seems to be certainly the only place that you could put what you're doing. And the other question was answered, the vegetation that will go in when the cottage and boathouse are removed. So as long as that's taken care of, I'm fine with this. Thank you.
Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. So the lot area is 3090 hectares, sorry, not hectares, square meters. Does that translate into what, a couple of acres? Is that, if I got that right?
0.75 of an acre.
Oh, sorry,
Just under.
0.75 of an acre. Wow, okay. And this is about, how many square feet was it, 45 or? 4,400. And the basement can be developed. So this is a result of the planning or lack of planning regimen on the Severn River, is that correct?
So through your chair hill to Member Cooper. So they are allowed to have 10% lot coverage. They are on the Trent Severn, so there's no gross floor area restrictions. And they're proposing with the garage, the boathouse, and the cottage, 9.3% lot coverage.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Were there any letters of correspondence on this application?
There were no letters of correspondence for this application.
Okay, seeing none, I'll read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves the minor variance application for A19-31 for 119 John Buchler Rd to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit the construction of a detached dwelling with a front yard setback of 8.9 meters to the dwelling wall, a height of 9.02 meters, and a front yard setback of 10 meters to the deck, to permit the construction of a two-story detached garage with a rear yard setback of 4 meters and a height of 5.4 meters, pursuant to the Shoreline Residential Type 1 zone, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan extent, location, scale, and use intended in the application. B, that a site plan control approval application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and the areas of new planting within the front yard in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. C, that a revegetation plan be submitted and approved detailing the species being planted, the area of the existing dwelling, and that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structures. I have a motion for approval. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Our next application is A19-38 for 397 Websters Lane. To the planner, please.
Excuse me. The next application that you have in front of you is to recognize a sleeping cabin with a setback of 1.5 meters to another building, where 5 meters is required, and we're recognizing it because it was built without a permit. As you can see on the screen, the subject land is identified in black at 397 Websters Lane. It's zoned Shoreline Residential Type 1. It's on Gala Lake, which is just off of 12 Mile Bay Road. It's designated waterfront in the township and district official plans. Show you an overview of the subject lands. You can see it on the screen in red, which shows the existing development and the existing vegetation. Survey of the subject lands, so you can see the existing cottage. And this is the sleeping cabin that is in front of you today. So it is located right behind the existing cottage and not visible from the shoreline. This is that area of that reduced setback of the 1.5 meters. So as you can see, the existing cottage and the sleeping cabin located just behind it. This is the rear of the sleeping cabin. So as you can see, the land drops off, and I do have another photo, there you go, showing that there is a steep slope behind the existing sleeping cabin, so they weren't able to move it back any further. This is the area of that reduced setback. Sorry, it's a little bit distorted. When I rotated it, it kind of made the picture go all wonky. That gives you the idea. This is a view to the shoreline. And a view of the existing cottage and the bump out on the cottage. So as you can see, you cannot see the sleeping cabin behind the existing cottage. And the intent of the separation between buildings is to ensure adequate access in a break-and-built form. So the sleeping cabin is in the same location. They used to have a sauna in this location that over the years was converted into a sleeping cabin, but done without a permit. So they did build it in the same location, however, they made it larger in size. There is no other area on the subject lands to construct the accessory structure, as it does have a steep drop-off just behind the cottage. The sleeping cabin does not negatively impact the aesthetic quality of the waterfront area. The application can be deemed minor, and it does comply with all 4 tests under the Planning Act. So staff are in support of the application. The applicant's agent is present and does have a presentation that they would like to do for you. I'll load that up. And if you have any questions for myself or for the agent, we're happy to.
Thank you, Dana. Has there been any correspondence on this application?
There were no letters of correspondence for this application.
Is the applicant present? And please step forward. And if you would give your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rick Hunter with Planscape, 104 Kimberley Avenue in Bracebridge, P1L1Z8. I have a very short presentation. I'd like to thank the committee, thank staff for their review on the application. As noted, the site plan shows the existing one-story cottage that's on the property and the corresponding one-story bunkie that is located immediately behind it off the deck. I would mention that the owners, Charles and Carmen Muscat, are here as well and are available to answer any questions, but they don't have a presentation of their own on it. As I mentioned, the cottage is about a one-story cottage. It's, as you can see from the photos that the staff had shown as well, that it's a modest cottage by most of our current standards at about 94 square meters. I just wanted to raise some of the main points. As noted in the staff report, the visual impact, the bunkie is located immediately behind the existing dwelling. It is compatible with the existing surrounding land uses, and again, it's appropriate for the property with the slopes that we'll see from the as well. Again, the view from the dock looking up and into the property. The main cottage is located about 37 meters back from the shoreline, well set back. The actual bunkie is about 47 meters back. As you can see with the slopes, it's a fairly steep property even at the front. As you can see from the air photo and the location of the dwelling toward the center of the lot, so it's actually well set back from the shoreline. Again, the view of the lake from the dock is just showing the surrounding area. Noted the lot features steep slopes, again, which drop off immediately to the north of the cottage and the sleeping cabin, so it's almost on a little bit of a hummock of its own. And it is the logical location. I always look at these situations recognizing that you're being asked to recognize an existing structure that's already been constructed. Obviously, your review has to look at it as if this building does not exist, and would you approve it if it was vacant, if it was not there at the present time? And from my review and looking at the knowledge of the site, that this is likely where you would put a similar structure in any event. As such, it would be appropriate to consider. Again, at the drop-off to the north of the cottage as well. So with that, we do support the township staff recommendation. In my opinion, as a planner, I believe the application satisfies the 4 tests for the minor variance. Those are noted in both your staff report and in the cover letter that our office had provided with the application, that the general intent and purpose of the official plan is maintained, that the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw is maintained, that it is desirable for the appropriate development or use of the property, particularly with respect to the location on the site, the steep slopes, and the impact itself is minor. There's no visual impact from either surrounding properties or from the shoreline. There is very little of a footprint on the property as well. So it's a modest recognition of a situation. I concur with Ms. Sotheby's comments on the separation between buildings. Again, in this instance, you are able to get around the building, and there's no reason necessarily why you would have to be 5 meters as opposed to 1.5 meters between these two types of buildings. They're very complementary. They work together. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'm just available for any questions if you have any, and would request approval of the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hunter. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this application? Seeing none, I'll bring this application before the committee for any questions or comments, and we'll begin with Member Cooper.
Thank you, I do not have any questions.
Member Demkew?
Thank you. I did visit the site too. The only question I really had was, this was originally a sauna, and how long ago did they actually make these changes?
I'll defer to the owner.
I was advised by the applicant that it was done in around 2009, so it's been about 10 years.
Okay, so I wondered why they didn't apply at that time, or...
It's always a little speculative. They've advised me that they had relied on their contractor, and of course it is their responsibility, so I think they recognize that now. Again, there's really no mitigating factor on that.
Okay, I see that there's no other way they could have done this, and I appreciate that. I just wondered why it wouldn't have come up much earlier.
It probably should have, and I think actually when it did come up was as the property was being listed for sale, and then there was a realization that there was a zoning, building permit issue that had come up at that point.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Member Matthews?
I just concur. I did have a site visit, and there's clearly no other place that building could go, so I'd be supportive of this.
Member Ferguson?
No additional comments. I'm just kind of curious why you wouldn't just have built it as an addition to the cottage and not had to go through this entire process.
If I may, the application, actually when it was realized that there was an issue, the owners did look at just basically linking the two buildings together, in which case you would not have had any zoning issues at all, because the coverage is correct, everything else is fine. But I think that the buildings, and as you can see from a couple of the photos, they actually, their roof patterns are sort of opposite each other. You could put that little breezeway in between, but I think their preference was to keep them as two separate structures. They work that way, and it seemed appropriate.
Thank you very much. I have no objection to this application.
Thank you. Member Bocek?
Thank you. Just a few comments. One, Dana, that this would obviously be going to the building department next to procure a building permit, which I can see some things that could be problematic. I'm a little concerned about the liability of an approval on this, especially with the angle of the roof. It looks like there's a little deck between the house and the structure, And any ice coming off of that roof is going to land right on that deck, which there could be people there, and I think the building department might have an issue with that. As far as the zoning, and that's what we're looking at today, is the zoning, I don't have any issues. It looks like it's the only place that it could go. But my question to you is, have you been to the site, Dana? And is there any kitchen or bathroom or any plumbing?
Kitchen, it's just for sleeping.
Okay, well, I don't have a problem with the zoning part of this. I'm okay with the zoning, but I do feel the building department may take some issue with it. Let
Yeah.
them take care of that part of it.
Yep,
Thank
they'll
you.
take a look and make sure it's up to, from about the 80s, prior to them owning it. Yeah, the sauna was from the
Okay.
80s, so there would have been no permit requirements. It was the change of use, turning it into a habitable sleeping cabin that requires the variance, and they're expanding that footprint within that required setback.
Okay. And is there an as-of-right amount of increase to that sauna that could have been, read the motion? We have a motion for approval for A19-38. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves the minor variance application for A19-38 for 397 Websters Lane to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit a sleeping cabin with a setback of 1.5 meters to another building pursuant to the shoreline residential type 1 zone, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. B, that a site plan control approval application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and areas for new planting within the front yard in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. And C, that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structures. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Our next application is A19-39 for 93 Peninsula Trail. To the planner, please.
Good morning. So our next application is A19-39 that was submitted by Len and Monica Menecola, submitted by Flow Drawings on behalf of them. The property is located at 93 Peninsula Trail, which is located on Little Lake. And the purpose of this application is to permit an addition to a dwelling and the removal of a sleeping cabin pursuant to the Shoreline Residential Type 1 zone. The subject lands are currently designated residential waterfront in the official plan and zoned SR1 in the zoning bylaw. So here we have a location map of the subject lands, as you can see here. In behind the subject lands, this is an inlet bay area where there is some existing FH1 fish habitat. There was a study completed and submitted as part of the application in support of the proposed development as per the requirements of the township official plan. And through a site plan agreement an update to the existing site plan agreement, which is a requirement as a condition of approval, the construction mitigation measures from this report would be included in that. So here we have an aerial of the subject lands. As you can see, it's a through lot with water to the north and south. Currently, there is a dwelling, 2 sleeping cabins, a shed sleeping cabins located in behind, the septic located further behind, and an existing boathouse located along the shoreline. So here we have the proposed site plan. So the property is outlined in orange. As I can see, it's kind of confusing with the adjacent development on it as well. So essentially what is being proposed is this cabin to the rear is being proposed to be demolished, and an addition to the main dwelling is proposed to the north of what currently exists. So the application in front of you today for approval includes a request to increase the maximum gross floor area of a legal non-complying dwelling of 201 square meters, where 140 square meters is permitted, to increase the maximum dwelling width to 17 meters where 12 meters is permitted, to permit a decrease in setback to an accessory structure of 1.3 meters, which is existing, and a total lot coverage of 13.1% where 11.1% is currently permitted on the subject lands. So here is the proposed dwelling elevation from the front. So this is what it would look like from the water. The front face of the existing dwelling would be maintained. This area here is what would be. So here are some site photos. So this is essentially the area of the proposed addition to be added onto the rear portion of the dwelling. This is the sleeping cabin that's located in the rear of the property, which would be demolished as part of this application. So here I'm standing essentially in the proposed front wall of where the addition would go, looking towards the shoreline. As you can see, there's not much mature vegetation along the shoreline, but this is relatively in common with the character of this portion of the lake. As you can see here, the Peninsula Trail, the private portion of Peninsula Trail does run along the front of the property. Again, just another view of the existing shoreline. This is a photo of the existing boathouse, and again, the shoreline. And then here we're looking at the existing rear of the dwelling, and as you can see, this is that accessory structure that is one of the portions of this application is to recognize the existing deficient setback between the dwelling and the shed. And a condition of approval as recommended by staff includes the removal of this leaned area, which I believe was the intention of the applicant anyways, but staff felt it necessary to require it as a condition of approval. The Township Building Department has conducted a site visit on the property and has been in discussions with the applicant to ensure that the proposed development is viable as it relates to the septic system. The building department has provided feedback on the application and do not have objection to the proposed development as long as the addition is built on piers. And the reason for this is to essentially allow that an acceptable mantle area is maintained on the property. And of course, that has been included as a condition as well as recommended by staff. So the extent of the proposed addition to the dwelling and the required variances are considered minor with the conditions as outlined by staff, and it is not anticipated to have any further negative visual impact from what currently exists on the property. And an update to the main dwelling would be considered a net benefit for the community. The applicant and the owners are here if you have any questions for them or myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Has there been any correspondence on this application?
We have received 4 letters of support for this application.
Is the applicant or its agent here? Is there anything you'd like to add to Victoria's comments? Could we please have your name and address for the record?
Good morning. My name is Victoria Hoffman. I'm here on behalf of Flow Drawings at 3 Violet Drive, Port Severn. Victoria Lemieux's done a good job representing this and presenting this presentation. Just to kind of speak further, one thing that we're also, Victoria, could you flip back to the other Zoom? We're also, so the purpose of this application was to basically use a non-complying lot and then shift the existing bunkie in the back into the main cottage to kind of not have as many accessory buildings. So we were working with the existing cottage being closer to the water, and we are removing that front deck as well as the lean-to and the cabin and cabin decks like Victoria had mentioned. And then if you go forward again. And then you'll notice how we have pushed the cabin or the addition to the back, working with the shed and the nature of the rear property line there because it's an unusual lot. And then the property owner is also here.
Thank you. Is there anything that you'd like to add, sir?
No, I have nothing to add, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this application? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring the application before the committee, and we'll begin with Member Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Victoria, your proposal is to increase the lot coverage to 13.1%. How does that relate with the existing, with the sleeping cabin, i.e. is the sleeping cabin about the same size as the new addition?
Sure, so through you, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned before, and just to provide further clarification, so there was a previous minor variance on the property that did permit that 11.1% lot coverage. That's where that number's coming from, just for clarification. And so the proposed addition is, I believe, and the designer would probably be able to answer this quicker than me, relatively similar in size. I believe the addition of the covered porch in the front is the majority of what pushed it further
forward
to that 13%. But the designer might be able to give you numbers.
So one thing to take note of is the approved lot coverage was 11.1%. The existing coverage is actually closer to 12. So I'm not too sure what happened there between ownerships and stuff like that, but using the survey, we actually calculated that it was already above what was approved. And then, to answer your question about the square footage, it is slightly larger, but they're close in.
Okay. I remember this application from a year or so ago. And the only other question I have for you, Victoria, on the right-hand property line, there seems to be another cabin there that's extremely close to the property line. Was that approved previously for that side yard setback, or?
So through you,
Yes,
Mr.
that
Chair, that setback there you're speaking of, yes, I believe it was included in the original minor variance application that essentially recognized the awkward
Shape of the
creation
lot.
of this
Yeah.
lot when it was adjacent to.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Member Demke?
Mr. Matthews already asked about that lot line question, so I have nothing else to add to that. Thank you.
Member Cooper?
I think everything's been covered here. Just a curiosity, Peninsula Trail that you said is in this photograph, number 4, I think, is that accessible to the public? Just curiosity.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it is a privately maintained.
Yeah, my name is Len Menecola, 93 Peninsula Trail. It is a private lane that services 6 cottages.
Thank you.
Member Ferguson?
No additional comments, Mr. Chair.
And Member Bocheck?
No, I don't have any issues with the application. I know that this subdivision, being part of the Tickner subdivision from back in the 70s, most of the lot lines then were a mess, and over the years they've kind of corrected them and infringed on a lot of people's buildings over the years. So side yard setbacks and things like that are just an atrocity down there. So I really don't have any issues with this application at all.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions or comments, have a motion, which I'll read. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves the minor variance application for A19-39 for 93 Peninsula Trail to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit an addition to a dwelling with a gross floor area of 201 square meters, a width of 17 meters, a setback of 1.3 meters to an accessory structure, and a lot coverage of 13.1% pursuant to the Shoreline Residential Type 1 zone, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, and scale, and use contemplated in the application. B, that a revision of the existing site plan control agreement be submitted and approved to the satisfaction of the Township of Georgian Bay. C, that the proposed addition only be permitted to be built on piers to the satisfaction of the Township of Georgian Bay Building Department. D, that the existing lean roof to the rear of the dwelling be removed prior to the issuance of a building permit for the proposed addition. E, that a demolition permit for the removal of the sleeping cabin be submitted and approved by the Township of Georgian Bay prior to the issuance of a building permit for the proposed addition. And F, that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structures. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Our next application is A19-40 for 85 Clerks Road. To the planner, please.
Right, so the next application that you have in front of you is for 85 Clerks Road, and it is to permit the construction of a detached dwelling with a front yard setback of 22.6 meters, where 30 meters is required, and 20.2 meters to a deck, where 26 meters is required. The subject lands is zoned shoreline residential type 5 exception 1, and the exception 1 states that a 30-meter front yard setback is required. I couldn't find any history on why this setback was required. However, that is what the zoning is, and they're requesting a reduced setback to that provision. As you can see, the subject lands on the screen. It is about 8 hectares. It's designated waterfront. There is fish habitat type 1 along the shoreline, and a supportive fish habitat impact assessment has been submitted with the application. To give you an aerial view of these subject lands, shown on the screen here. As you can see, it is a long, narrow property, and when it abuts both of the lakes, it gets a little bit narrow in there. The area of the reduced setback, this is Haggard Lake, and this is Toronto Lake. So the entirety of the shoreline on Toronto Lake is designated type 1 fish habitat, and just portions on Haggard Lake is type 1 fish habitat, so not the entire shoreline on that side. On the screen is the survey. So the area of the reduced setback is towards Haggard Lake. And the area towards Toronto Lake does comply with that 30-meter setback. So as you can see, this dotted line, this is that 30-meter envelope from both of the properties. So since they have water on both sides, they're required to comply with each setback on each side. This is the building area, and it is a flat open rock in this area. This is a southern view to that shoreline, so this is on Haggard Lake. And another view out into Haggard Lake. This is a partial view from the proposed building location. And another view of that south shoreline, so down here is where that type 1 fish habitat is. And another view out into Haggard Lake. And that northern shoreline on Haggard Lake. So this is looking down that building location, so there will have to be a little bit of vegetation removed, but as you can see, the majority of it is bald rock. And that's the rear, so that's the rear yard setback towards Toronto Lake. This is Toronto Lake, which is designated a type 1 fish habitat, as you can see from the photos. Another view of Toronto Lake. And a rear view of the proposed cottage. Just to give you an idea of what the proposed cottage is going to look like, there's the elevations on the screen. As you can see, there is a Muskoka room off to the side, and that is the deck that does not meet the setback and is requesting the variance. And another view of the elevation. It does comply with the height requirements. So the proposed cottage is 260 square meters, 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath. It does have a loft, and it is just a partial loft. It does not encompass the entire second floor. As you can see, there are portions that are open to below, and there is no basement. The intent of the front yard setback is to ensure structures are adequately set back from the high water mark and to ensure the character of the area is maintained. So the subject, or the proposed dwelling, does comply with the setback requirements on one side to Toronto Lake, but it does not comply to the setback on Haggard Lake due to the narrowness of the lot in this area. The dwelling is set back from the shoreline, and it is consistent with the surrounding properties. Minimal vegetation will be removed since the majority of the building envelope is on exposed bald rock. Site plan control will be a condition of approval in order to maintain the vegetation and to implement the recommendations of the Fish Habitat Impact Assessment. The application is minor and meets the 4 tests of the Planning Act. Staff are in support of the application, and the agent is present if you have any questions for yourself or for me.
Thank you very much, Dana. Has there been any correspondence on this application?
There is one letter of objection for this application.
Thank you. If the applicant is present, would you care to make any comment? And would you please give us your name and address for the record?
Good morning. My name is Savas Veratis. I'm from Plan Muskoka. My address is P.O. Box 5384, Huntsville, Ontario, P1H 2K7. I'm here this morning representing the De Seaghers as their agent and professional planner on this matter. Basically, I'll just start by saying that I do concur with staff's recommendation on this application that it meets the 4 tests for minor variance under the Planning Act. I wrote a planning justification report, which I believe was included in the package that was sent around as well, which also concurred with that recommendation made by staff. Just to add a little bit, because I think the presentation was pretty comprehensive in terms of what the application is all about. I also don't know why this property specifically had a 30-meter setback requirement on it. I think it has something to do with the type 1 fish habitat located on both sides of the 2 lakes that it abuts. But the nature of this application was such that the most suitable location to build while still maintaining a waterfront view on this property was chosen for this building. And it was, when you applied 30 meters from both sides, it was impossible to find a building envelope that actually worked. So basically, the lesser of the 2 evils is that Haggard Lake does have a portion of its shoreline that is type 2 fish habitat instead of type 1, whereas Toronto Lake, its entire shoreline is type 1 fish habitat. So the building is being positioned to be adjacent to the type 2 fish habitat area, which is where the bald rock was shown along that shoreline. A fish habitat assessment was prepared by Riverstone Environmental that confirmed that the location of the building chosen and the setback chosen of 20 meters would not have any negative impact on the type 1 fish habitat as long as the recommendations in the report were implemented. And as staff has mentioned, site plan control will be required. Site plan approval will be required prior to any building permit being issued. So those recommendations of that report will be implemented, and the type 1 fish habitat would be protected. Other than that, like it's a fairly large property, so this is a very small portion of this property that's actually being developed. The letter of objection, I believe, deals with an access issue, if I'm correct on that, but we'll probably hear about that. I don't really have anything more to add to this application. Again, like I say, I agree with staff's recommendation. I believe it meets 4 tests for minor variance, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak to this application? Please come forward and state your name and address, please. Feel free to use the other chair if you wish to come forward, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Ron Clark, or Clerk, as some people call it. This property is part of the original Clerk homestead from well over 100 years ago. It was divided off many, many years ago. I am very, very familiar with what has happened with the properties, and I'd like to point out some things very much in favor of having a cottage there and approving this variance. For a start, the location of the cottage are approved, or on the photograph here, or drawing, not adequately illustrate the topographical properties here. The cottage itself is going to sit on terra firma, granite rock, which in front of the cottage towards Haggard Lake is all terra firma, granite rock. Behind the cottage, there's a slight dip downward and then upward towards Toronto Lake, and along there's another ridge of pure granite rock. Because of this topographical dip, this area was approved for a septic system, mid-50s, 60s? Yeah, mid-60s. Because at that time, right where this proposed cottage is, there used to be a cottage there. There's also used to be a cottage approximately 100 meters south of that, where you see a very high elevation on that drawing. There was a huge panel cottage built up there, but it burnt down. The cottage that used to be at the proposed site got into a state of disrepair after that, and it was dismantled and taken away. At this site, there is already hydro pole with live electricity there because the hydro company left the hydro feed there because they figured there was going to be a cottage built there sometime. This site has been approved before. There has been a cottage there, and I cannot see any reason whatsoever why the De Seaghers should not be allowed to build a cottage there.
Thank you very much. And ma'am, do you have a comment to make? Okay, if you wouldn't mind to turn on the microphone and state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Kim Nishaw. I live at, well, the cottage I reside at is at 41 Hager Lake Road, which is kitty corner from where the proposed cottage will be built. And I do remember the old cottage from my uncle's time when I used to visit as a kid. Now I own that same, I own the cottage my uncle used to live on, or have. My only question to planning is when we did our renovation, we had to pay for the shore road allowance to be closed. Does that come into play here for this application? That's all my question is. Is the shore road to be closed or is it within the setbacks? So, that's my question. Thank
Okay.
you.
Dana,
happy
could
to
you
answer.
answer that question?
They're not building on their shore road allowance, so they wouldn't need to purchase it. If they do want to build a dock, a boathouse, or what have you, then they would be required to purchase that before they could build anything within it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions and observations. Is there any other member of the public that wishes to question or comment? Seeing none, I'll bring the application before the committee. And we'll begin with Councillor Bocek.
Thank you, Chair Hill. Couple of questions that perhaps our zoning department can answer, and if not, maybe the previous owner. Usually in times when we see a large front yard setback, there's a reason for it, and this looks like a very low-lying approach to the water. My question is, in the springtime, in the runoff of spring, does the water on this body of water increase in height, and therefore it would come up the shore quite a ways, and that could be why they've asked for that 30-meter setback. So any history on the water level would certainly help.
I see Mr. Clark is, has some history to share with us, so if you wouldn't mind.
Haggard Lake is one of very few lakes that has a very stable water level. Doesn't vary any more than 6 or 8 inches during the spring.
No, okay, that's good.
Because at the extreme east end of Haggard Lake, there is a flat rock, just like this tabletop, that for some reason the beavers can't get it down to stick to it.
Mm.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
That's my only concern.
Okay. Member Ferguson.
Having visited the site, the topography is all over the place as you go the length of this lot. And I think that this is one of the few strong areas for a cottage to be sited. It's going to be 74 feet, back from the water, where most of us go get 66 feet. So I really don't have any objection to this site at all.
Member Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, visited the site. It's a challenge, to say the least. And I'm not envious of the contractor having to get his truck down there to build if this is approved. But I would agree. I mean, it seems to be the only logical spot for a cottage. It's well set back in normal times. The lake isn't overly inhabited, so it seems like the logical location to me.
Thank you. Member Demke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I visited the site too. It was a bit of a challenge. My question originally, when I left, was because the two lakes are so close together and the bush road that goes through, which I assume will be the access road, how much of a setback is the back of the proposed house from the road? Yeah, right, from that, the last bit of the proposed cottage to the road, is that an issue? It seemed to be okay, but I was thinking after how close those two lakes are.
I believe that is just their driveway. Anywhere from 10 to 15 meters from it.
Okay. No, that's good. That's all the questions I had. Thank you.
Member Cooper.
Thank you. No questions. It looks like the right site for this particular property.
Thank you. I was able to drive almost to the site, which I wouldn't do again.
Who's paying for it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with the planner that that is a very suitable location for the construction. I would also wonder why there's a 30-meter setback. It seems there's quite appropriate amount of rock in front of that proposed location to certainly handle the water, increased water that Mr. Clark described. So I would be in favor as well. All right, if there are no further questions or comments, I'll read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves the minor variance application for A19/40 for 85 Clerks Road to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit the construction of a detached dwelling from front yard setback of 22.6 meters to the dwelling wall and 20.2 meters to the deck, pursuant to the Shoreline Residential Type 5 Exception 1 zone, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. B, that a site plan control approval application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development and vegetation protection area in the front yard and implement the recommendations of the fish habitat impact assessment completed by Riverstone Environmental Solutions dated July 10, 2019, in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. And C, that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Our next application is A19-41 for 18 Island 340 Severn River. To the planner, please.
Our next application was submitted by Tim Leatherdale on behalf of Christine Taylor for lands located at 18 Island 340 Severn River. The purpose of the application is to permit an addition to an existing dwelling pursuant to the Shoreline Residential Type 1 zone. The property is currently designated residential waterfront in the official plan. So here you can see the subject lands located on an island in the north portion of Gloucester Pool. Here is an aerial of the subject lands. Current structures on the property include a dwelling, an associated deck, and a dock. And also, sorry, a freestanding deck as well. So here we have the survey that was submitted as part of the application. As you can see here, the existing dwelling is located relatively close to the shoreline, which has made it a legal non-complying structure. There is the existing freestanding deck that I was speaking of over here in the shoal area. And the proposed addition is to be located in the rear, as you can see outlined in red. So the existing dwelling is approximately 780 square feet in size. The proposed addition is 820 square feet approximately, which would equate to a total footprint of about 1,560 square feet of a dwelling on the subject lands. Here we have the proposed front elevation, and as you can see, or as you will see in some of the photos that I provide in a few minutes here, the elevation of the cottage from the front really is not proposed to change from what currently exists, other than the extension of a portion of the deck to further cover the rest of the front wall. So here you have some photos of the property. Again, as you can see here, this is the front wall of the cottage and the existing deck. And in this photo, I'm standing on that freestanding deck that I pointed out earlier, so kind of on a shoal area that you can see a direct view of the front wall of the cottage. Again, as you can see, it's quite heavily vegetated for it being so close to the water, and it is located in an inlet bay area, so it is not visible from the main channel of traffic. So here we have a photo of the existing dwelling to the rear. And here is a photo of the existing, or sorry, of the proposed addition area, essentially to be built out to the extent here. There are some orange stakes, but it's pretty difficult to see them in the photo. Here's a photo of the existing vegetation to the front of the cottage, and a part of this application is to allow for some expansion of the proposed deck to go a bit closer to the water here. The application as submitted included a request for 0 meters to the water's edge. However, based on a site visit by staff as well as discussions with the applicant on what is actually intended to be built, a minimum setback requirement of 1 meters is being recommended by staff for approval of this application. So here we have a photo of me standing essentially where the addition is being proposed. As you can see, there's quite heavy vegetation. It's not anticipated that any part of the addition area would be viewed from the water. Here we have a view of the existing large rock outcrop to the rear of the dwelling, which would have been required to be blasted out if they were to have proposed to move the entire cottage further back in the property. And here I am standing at the essential central portion of the proposed addition. Again, you can see the existing vegetation that does exist. And this is a really good photo of coming away from the island. The proposed dwelling area is located in here. As you can see, there really is just not much of a visual impact existing, nor would be from this proposed application. So staff do recommend approval of the application with a minimum of 1 meter setback to a deck to allow for some expansion on that front wall of the deck. The overall proposed built form is of reasonable size, and the proposed addition would not be visible from the water or adjacent properties to the island, so we are in support of the application. If you have any questions for myself or the agent on behalf of the owner is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Has there been any correspondence on this application?
There have been no letters of correspondence for this application.
If the applicant is present and would like to make a comment, please come forward. Okay, thank you, we're covered. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this application? Okay, seeing none. Seeing no questions from the public, I'll bring the application before the committee for any questions and concerns, beginning with Member Cooper.
Nothing at the moment, thank you.
Member Demkew?
No questions.
Member Matthews?
I have to ask about the deck. When it's recommended or permitted at 16 meters, and they were suggesting 0 meters, and you suggested 1 meter, Victoria. And am I correct saying it's now 2 meters or 2.1 meters from the shoreline?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you're correct. It is currently 2.1 meters from that corner. As you can see, it's quite maybe this photo would be better to look at. It's quite elevated from the water, but it is currently 2.1. As you can see on the survey, the shoreline kind of dips in here, and that's where it creates a bit of a pinch point.
It looks like a lot more than that from the photograph.
Yeah, and it is quite, because of the topography in that, for instance, what was there existing, I had no problems walking around all the way to the freestanding deck, and in my opinion, from viewing the site, allowing an expansion, and it would be cut kind of on a kitty corner to maintain that 1 meter, would still allow for no problems in pedestrian access.
Still allow the access to, okay.
In my opinion, yes.
Thank you.
Member Ferguson?
It's because it's on an island, it wasn't possible to do a site inspection, which I would very much have liked to have done when we're looking at a requirement where we're going to build 578 square feet over what's permitted, and that the dwelling width itself will be 75 feet, 39 feet, a difference of 36 feet. But based on some of the topography, it looks like there aren't many other choices to go along here, so I can support it.
Thank you. Member Bocek?
Yeah, unlike the Clerk property where I was asking about the rise of water, I am familiar with the Severn River and how high that water does rise in the springtime, being a property owner there. And you can have water that comes up 3-4 feet in the springtime, in the runoff time. So I'm a little concerned about the proximity of the front deck to the shoreline being a 0-meter setback, that there's going to be a lot of ice damage and other damage caused by the high water. So, and the fact that the build is substantially over what is recommended. So I would like to see that be pushed back. There's no need, as they say in planning, there's no need to be a 0 setback from the water. That's a want as far as I'm concerned. So I have a real issue with the closeness to the shoreline, being it's on the Severn River.
Yes, go ahead, Victoria.
Through Mr. Chair, just to elaborate on some of your comments that we made, and you are correct that initially it was a 0 meter. Staff is recommending at least a 1 meter. When it comes to the impact of the water and that proposed new portion of the deck, it's hard to see, but I don't know if you can see here, there is an existing quite a large dock area to the front of that as well. Me personally, I do not cottage on this lake or anything like that. I do believe Gloucester Pool is controlled. The director might be able to.
I can just
I'm not
point
sure.
of clarification, this is on Gloucester Pool.
It's below the chute.
Yeah, so it is a controlled water body.
I was
The water does not change more
I
than,
thought it was above the chute where the water changes quite a bit.
yeah, no, it's below the chute, so.
Hence my reason for all our bodies of water on our maps here that are never labeled, and I've asked for it many times. We need to start labeling the bodies of water in certain areas. Thank you. One other question, the topography that is 1 meter back, what elevation would it be? I see it's fairly abrupt coming up from the water, but if you come back 1 meter, how much elevation from the water would there be?
That's a good question. When it comes to the actual contours, I'm not sure the answer. As you can see here, this is the dock that I was speaking of, and to get up to where the existing deck is located to the stairs is quite a ways up, essentially a steep rock. The agent for the applicant is also the proposed contractor. He may be a bit more aware of, in meters or feet, how far up that might be.
Yeah.
So, Tim Leatherdale
Good.
Construction.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sorry, it's Tim Leatherdale.
Tim Leatherdale, okay.
Construction. I'm at 2645 Websters Road, Severn Township. To answer your question, if we came back about 1 meter, it would be about 2 feet higher than the existing deck right now. And it's on there's a rock that would house any pad that we would need for it, and it wouldn't. Because of being in the bay, and I've only been there for 2 years, but the front part of the dock was destructed from ice before, but in that bay does not have any ice damage. That dock's been there for about 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's a question from Member Cooper.
Not a question, just that I thought I would support Member Bocek's suggestion with respect to our planning reports. I think it would really be very helpful to have this information, and frankly, right at the very beginning of the report would be wonderful. So, good suggestion. I hope we can do that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions or comments, I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves a minor variance application for A19-41 for 18 Island 340, Severn River, to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit an addition to a dwelling with a gross floor area of 148.6 square meters and a width of 23 meters, and to permit a dock with a front yard setback of 1 meter pursuant to the shoreline residential type 1 zone, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application, with the exception that a 1 meter setback from the high water mark is required for the deck. B, that a site plan control approval application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and areas of new planting within the front yard in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. And C, that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Our next application. Sorry.
10-minute recess?
Do I? The chair would like to notice implement a 10-minute recess, and we will reconvene at 10:30. Thank you.
This is the longest I've ever sat in this chair.
Oh, boy, no. So, when you have to be, I'm just around that, but whenever there's more mention. Anything you need from me at all, or?
We went by your place last week, we were going to cottage, and we didn't stop you.
Couple of days ago,
Oh, yeah, that's more like it.
All these typos, Dave.
We've overcome most of it. It wasn't something terribly.
Okay.
I like to see some reasoning.
yeah, there was a,
All right, so 10 minutes?
So that was the.
Oh, A19-40?
Clearly from the other, got evidence. It's not an issue.
We have 3 different names for that body of water. So you have Severn River, this one, the one before that was Gloucester Pool, and we have another lake. It's all the same body of water.
and I'm walking around.
It should all say Gloucester Pool. And that's why in the maps, when they show the property and the big body of water, with no name on it, we've got to have a name on it.
Good core.
Well, I couldn't find that, I couldn't find it, drove all around, I lived there, so, well, there's no 85 marking yet, because this is where it goes, and then I just start contractor, here you're showing on it, so it's close up. That's it, there's a bush around there, it's not even, I know, you see, but it's the only one, when you go there, you only gotta take it.
Oh, that's funny.
We've talked about doing that, so I'm.
For 4 years.
But I think that's in conjunction with this water. Well, today we had 3 applications with 3 different names, with Severn River, Gloucester Pool, and Little Lake, all on the same body of water. This, even if you just have one in the corner, this is what
We have them labeled now, you can see what it's called, but those labels need to be fixed.
But if you have a map of our township, Severn River, yet they're all on the same body of water. They're almost, there's no difference. So they need to do that. Okay, so especially these guys from the islands, have no idea.
I mean, these guys on the island.
We're also talking about township map too, where in every application you'll have a picture of a township with an arrow pointing to where we're talking about. Because when you're talking about Gala Lake or Toronto Lake, most people don't know if it's across the street here or 50 miles north of it.
I know where it is now.
You know where it is now?
So do all the scratches on my car.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Jamie got the point pretty good this morning.
Victoria, I have to impressed that you got an email on Friday at 7 o'clock.
Well,
Now we can officially go.
You want the lake name, and put your name tag up.
Yeah.
Now I'll get to how come it's way in that area? It's back, it's well vegetated. Don't be I'm quite aware of that. Yeah, no, I saw that. That's why I asked where that chain.
Yeah, chain links.
Because it wasn't hard to decipher. Good job.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. They just like to object to everything.
Oh, yeah. All right, I'll give you the nudge and we can.
Here, so we go down to 1 degree in the hangdog channel.
That's a good one.
1 degree, hangdog channel. 1 degree. No skinny dipping tonight.
That's a water No, you're making all this
Yeah,
up.
I can understand. I do it more often than you when you're not meeting.
Yeah. Is this right now?
Says right now it's 4 degrees, feels like 0. It's supposed to be 1 degree.
It's supposed to be good
this weekend. Where do you live? 12 on Saturday, 15 on Sunday. 17 on Monday, with only 30%. Yeah, well, I'm up on 6.
It's getting better.
Right here in that, come over there, there's a winter storage. Deep one, all of it. Okay. They got a truck. Look at this. No, that have you pulled your docks on the west side? We saw your boats on the east side.
Late last night.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting back to order. The time is 10:30. And the next application on the agenda is application number A19-42 for 353 Kilty Bay Road. To the planner, please.
Right, so the application in front of you is for 353 Kilty Bay Road. The application is requesting to recognize the construction of a detached garage that was not built as per the approved building permit plans, with an interior side yard setback of 3.5 meters, where 5 meters is required, and a separation between buildings of 4.4 meters, where 5 meters is required. To give you an overview of where the subject property is, you can see it on the screen in black. It is on Stewart Lake. It is zoned shoreline residential type 1 and designated waterfront in the township and district official plan. An aerial imagery to show the existing property and the existing vegetation. Here's the survey of the property. So it shows the garage and the dwelling and the other accessory structures on the subject lands. The garage is about 30.5 meters from the water, so it does meet the front yard setback where 20 meters would be required. And the 3.5 meters setback is here. So the garage is constructed on an angle, and about 4.4 meters to the closest point to the existing cottage. So the intent of the side yard setback is to ensure buildings on adjacent lots are adequately set back in order to maintain the privacy and enjoyment of the waterfront area. Separation between buildings is to ensure access in a break and built form. So it's about 6 to 8 meters from the garage to the adjacent building on the adjacent property. Just to give you some photos, so this is the detached garage, and that shows the area of that reduced setback to the cottage. The area of the reduced setback to the interior side lot line. That is that area of the reduced setback, so where that 3.5 meters is, so you can see the flag there. The area of the reduced setback looking towards the neighboring cottage. So as you can see, there is some existing vegetation in this area, and staff are recommending that further plantings take place within that area of the reduced interior side yard setback. This is the side lot line. This is looking towards the water. So as you can see, the property does slope as you get closer to the water. And the vegetation buffers the existing garage. That area of that reduced setback. Another photo of that area of that reduced setback. And the abutting property. So this is where the additional plantings would be required if the application is approved, in order to further mitigate the visual impact to the adjacent property owner. So this is standing on the dock looking up towards the cottage and the garage. This is standing almost at the very end of the dock looking up towards the cottage and the garage. So as you can see, the garage as well as the cottage are not visible from the shoreline. And again, another view of that reduced setback. The reduced setback to the neighbor. So when reviewing the application, staff noted when reviewing the application, if there would be an impact on the neighbor if the garage was at 5 meters, which would comply with the zoning bylaw and what their building permit was supposed to be constructed at. And it would be visible at 5 meters to the neighbor. So although we would rather that the applicant complies to the 5 meter setback, we reviewed the application as it was set out in front of us. So if they complied, we don't have any control over site plan or requiring additional planting and vegetation in that area of the interior side lot line. So through the application, we would be able to apply development controls onto the subject lands, so site plan control and requiring additional plantings in that area of the reduced setback in order to further reduce the visual impact to the neighbor. So this would be a net benefit to the subject property and to the adjoining property. Staff have reviewed the application as it was submitted, and staff believe that the application does comply with the 4 tests under the Planning Act, and staff are in support of the application. The owner is present if you have any questions for them, or if you have any questions for myself, we're happy to answer those.
Thank you, Dana. Has there been any correspondence on this application?
We have received 2 letters of objection for this application.
Thank you. Is the applicant present, and would you care to add anything to what Dana has presented? Please state your name and address.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Gord Johnston. I live at 5 Ida Red Road, Carlisle, Ontario, LOR 1H3. Just relative to Dana's presentation here, she did an adequate job, a very good job actually putting this together, but a couple things that I want to note, that when we actually did the survey for this so that we could apply for the permit, the survey was done, it was staked. Construction started in the wintertime for the foundation. There was a significant amount of blasting that had to take place on the northeast corner of the lot. As a result of that, the rock was pushed back into the adjacent property line, where they where they pushed the stake back. That, coupled with the winter snow removal, it was purely a mistake by the contractor. He's not here today, but I have spoken to him. If you look at the actual angle of the property, I don't know if you can put that survey back up, Dana. Yeah, right there. So you'll see it's 3.5, as she points out, 3.5 meters. It's only the corner of the actual property, and it had to be angled because of the mature vegetation on the northeast side of the structure. The angling of the garage was unfortunate because we were trying to stay within the 5 meters of the cottage, and that just wasn't possible with the land space that was available. So that's what I wanted to add.
Okay, we may have some questions for you after. Thank you for the presentation. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this application? If so, please come forward, give us your name and address.
Good morning, my name is Dave Clancy. I'm representing 361 Kilty Bay Rd, the direct neighbor to the Johnston's property. Does everybody have my objection letter? Yeah, they do, okay. I find it interesting, some of the pictures up there. One of the biggest problems I have with the property, what they did to it, is they built up that side of the property about 10 feet on the one side and 5 or 6 feet at least on the one side. Go back to that slide where it shows the side of the property. You basically have an unnatural hill now. I think there's I think there's one other one. Yeah, right there. Like, that's a totally unnatural hill. So first of all, the background was, have a neighbor who doesn't even talk to me before he does this major thing, and then builds up the hill to about, I don't know, my picture shows about 10 feet. I think it's 10 feet at the one side minimum, and the other side probably 5 feet. And then builds a structure that was in about maybe 2 inches of the height restriction based on, in my opinion, a bit of a loophole in the bylaw where it's done based on the finished grade versus the natural grade, which most buildings would be the natural grade. Right in the bylaws, always talking about natural grade. I guess for a detached garage, it talks about a finished grade. But I don't think the intent is to build up your property by 10 or 15 feet and then build this structure that dwarfs my cottage now. Basically, what's going on here is something that's gone on, I guess, in a lot of municipalities in the past where they build and they say, oops, sorry, we made a mistake, ask for forgiveness, and everybody just rubber stamps it and, does it as if nothing was a problem. And I know the City of Toronto is really clamping down on this stuff now. I know of 2 properties in Leaside who had, buildings knocked down that did similar type stuff, where people went, oops, sorry, went over 2 meters or 2 meters in height or too much of encroachment or whatever, and they had to move it or tear it down. And this is old style type stuff where I'll repeat myself. Basically build, ask for forgiveness later, and everybody says, oh yeah, he spent money. It doesn't look too bad from his point of view. Not too good from my point of view, but so sad, let's give it to him. I don't think that's the right type of attitude. I think it sets a very, very bad precedent. And obviously it affects me drastically. And put a few plants, I think that's a joke, personally. Maybe paint a little waterfall on the side of his garage, like it's a joke. And so I'm really kind of upset with the planning department. They've taken this attitude of plant a few trees and let it slide through. Sure I had any other points here. Yeah, so anyways, I'm just upset that, it was all done in secret. Then got the building permit in January, built it while, of course, we're not around. And then we arrive in June and now get this massive structure overtowering our property. And I think it's a bad precedent. It was a very bad behavior, and that's why I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Clancy, for coming in and doing that. And I'm sure as we go through the analysis of this application, there may be more questions coming your way. So if you guys wouldn't mind just hanging in there, we'll do that. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment on this application? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public part of this application and bring the application before the committee. And we will begin with Member Bochek.
Thank you, Chair Hill. Questions are to the Planning Department. Initially, when the application was submitted to the Planning Department for this build, it was approved by the Planning Department, knowing that there would be a change in elevation. Of course, you didn't know that it was going to be built too close, 1.5 meters too close to the building, but you did review it and approve and pass it on to the building department at that point?
Yep, through you, Chair Hill, to Member Bochek. Yes, so the application would have come to the planning department to review compliance to the zoning bylaw. So planning would only sign off if they met all of their setbacks and height, lot coverage, and everything of that nature. So the application was compliant to the zoning bylaw, and then it would go to the building department for their review under the building code.
Okay, and the applicant did continue on to procure a building permit for this garage as well too?
Correct.
So it wasn't like it was built and then asked for permission later. It was all approved by the township.
Yes, a permit was issued, and then it was later identified that it wasn't in the location that was approved with the correct setbacks.
And that was found out by our building department upon inspection? Or was it complaint driven?
It was complaint driven.
Okay. So the garage would have been built there regardless, just a 1.5 meters back from the property line. So the sight line would be same, the towering over the neighbors would be the same, everything would be the same, it's just 1.5 meters too close to the property line.
That is correct.
And have you considered, or are you going to impose a site plan agreement? I know you've asked for planting of vegetation and that to mask it a little bit, but you will be looking for an agreement as well too?
Yeah, site plan agreement and additional planting.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just, I didn't quite get the answer to one of Member Bochek's questions. And the question was, does a change in elevation, is that a part of the building permit application?
We wouldn't have known what the elevation was. We would have just looked at the drawings that were submitted to ensure they complied with the height.
And would we have to ask the building department if backfilling and elevation change is a part of that building permit process, approval process?
Would have been considered at the foundation inspection. Before the garage was built, conforming with the elevation.
Can I just I have a question here? There was no elevation change. This is on bedrock. So it didn't, the actual building and the structure was not built up as Mr. Clancy suggests. It's sitting right on bedrock. We blasted the side of the building, but it didn't change the elevation.
If we, just to sort of get a clarification on that as well, if you look at the pictures that the planning department is providing us here, we see a fairly significant difference in the elevation between the garage and the existing houses. And is that because there was a change in topography there? So there's no backfill under the concrete basement or concrete floor for the garage?
That's correct. It's the elevation topography was always higher than the actual cottage.
Okay, thank you.
I agree with that. It was higher than the actual cottage, but it was basically, that was built up by at least 10 feet on the side closest to the lake. No chance it was a hill like that before.
That's incorrect.
Okay, for Mr. Clancy then, would it be correct to say that one side of the garage floor was on grade and the other had to be built up to make it level?
I think both sides are built up by, the one side was a little bit less because it is a bit of a downslope towards the lake. So the side furthest from the lake was built up probably 5 or 6 feet by my estimation, and the other side was about 10 feet. You can tell by, there's no way there was a hill, it's totally unnatural hill the way that's laid out right now.
Okay.
It wasn't that kind of a hill. It was a normal downgrade, and they built it all up.
Thank you very much for that. We'll go through the committee and see if
My
there's any
picture,
other...
Appendix 3A, kind of shows, and it's kind of hard to tell because it's black and white or whatever, but, you know, it does show how the dirt is a different type of dirt, and my old, what do you call it? The picture shows the old, what do you call those things?
The old theodolite or survey instrument?
You put stuff in your rocks in your little...
Wheelbarrow.
Wheelbarrow, there you
Sounds
go.
like, yeah.
That wheelbarrow was basically even land right there. It wasn't like the wheelbarrow is now like, 10 or 15 feet below.
I noticed you had your grandson in there as down as 5 feet as well.
Yeah, he's 5 feet, maybe 4'11" and a half, but we'll say
okay.
5 feet rounded up.
Okay.
Just like they were rounding everything up here.
Well, let's go through the remaining questions and concerns the members might have and see where we end up. Is that it for you, Mr. Member Bocek?
Yes.
Okay. Member Ferguson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This garage is there, it's sitting there, and to meet the zoning bylaw, it would have to shift approximately 4.5 feet. And if it was moved 4.5 feet, there would, I don't think it would make a tremendous difference in the visual impact to your deck. 4.5 feet is not much.
Doesn't sound like much to you, but sitting on my deck, any inches at this point are significant.
Secondly, that if, as it stands now, if we were to approve this variance, then the township has the right to impose plant controls, development controls, and insist on some vegetation between the garage and the neighbor, which if you were to move it, would not occur. So I think if I were the application, I'd think that the lesser, it's better for me to have the township able to control the property now as far as plantings go, rather than not having that ability.
I fully disagree. The planting, they've now upheaved the soil. There's not much soil there to start with. It's a very rocky
Excuse me,
area.
Mr. Clancy,
Yeah.
I would, please wait until
Okay,
you
sorry.
are asked to respond.
Okay, sorry, I thought you was talking to me there.
No, it's not a conversation, we're having a formal meeting, so
Sorry, okay.
if you wouldn't mind, just hang on and we'll ask you if you need to comment.
Those are my comments, Mr.
All
Chair.
right, thank you very much, Mr. Berger. Any questions or comments from Member Matthews?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just a point of clarity, Mr. Johnston says it's basically on bedrock now. Was the original plan, I'll say, to twist the garage counterclockwise so that you would have at least met the 5-meter setback from the side yard?
That's correct, yes.
And would that also have allowed the 5 meter from the house if it was
Yes,
counterclockwise twisted?
that's correct, yes.
Right. Okay, and I agree with Mr. Ferguson's comments about this may be a better scenario with control by the township. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the answer there. Member Matthews asked if you had considered realigning the garage, and what was your response?
No,
Yes.
I asked originally if it was
The original-
twisted a little bit counterclockwise from the drawing.
Yeah.
If it had twisted counterclockwise a little bit towards the cottage, it would have given the 5-meter setback from the lot line. And a 5-meter setback.
I have also a copy of,
Permit was based.
Okay, so again, why didn't that happen?
okay, so I have a copy of the original survey which showed exactly that. It was supposed to be twisted so it wasn't going to, encroach on the 5-meter setback from the property line. When the blasting started and when you started doing it, there was mature vegetation on the northeast side, which is what Mr. Clancy is concerned about, which is over the 3.5 meters. It was that the contractor saw it, and he blasted the rock out, put it in the back of the property, and he pushed the stake back, the stake that was marking the 5-meter property line, he pushed it back. So when he went to start doing the foundation in the wintertime, he misguided the distance from the property line.
Okay. Supplemental?
Supplementals, Mr. Chair? Yes. Mr. Johnson, you talk about blasting. Could you give me a reference as to what was blasted? Because you're saying also that the garage is built on bedrock, but you blasted, did you have to blast the whole thing, or was
No.
this at the back or the side, or?
During the northeast side of the cottage, or sorry, the garage, I would say he blasted it 5 or 7 feet inside from, here, I'll stand up and I'll show you. He blasted this side here, and he stopped blasting here, because this is all bedrock back here, so the elevation stayed the same. So
And
he blasted the front, this-
Is the front pretty much bedrock as well?
The front was bedrock, but he blasted this side here too. So
So in fact, you've actually lowered the garage from
lowered from
what was originally there. Thank you.
Member Dempsey?
I don't have many further comments. Mr. Ferguson brought up a good point. I mean, when it's there now, if it had been to original plan, I don't think the view would be that much more affected. It would still be an issue, I guess, for Mr. Clancy, but potentially through the planning department and the building stuff, they might be able to help address this. No more comments.
Thank you. Member Cooper?
Thank you. Could we go back to the photograph of the side of the building you just had up recently where it showed the elevation, the sort of steep elevation, that one? Just for my clarification, I did not see the site, but has some of the blasted rock and earth been pushed down this slope towards the neighbor? I'm just trying to understand if that's been filled in and sort of raised in any way.
I can defer to the applicant on where they put the blasted rock.
Sorry, so as you can see, when they blasted the rock, they put it to the back of the property. Contrary to Mr. Clancy's claim, it did drop off quite a bit, so that rock was just built as a retaining wall around it.
But, sorry to be, I'm trying to get sort of an understanding though. So this is some of the blasted rock,
Correct?
but is there fill that's been added in here?
No.
One of the concerns I have is just seeing the rock in and of itself. That's a good way to kill trees, is to put rock over solid roots.
Right.
They die.
Right.
So that's concerning to me. So that's one comment. And maybe the planning department and building department can mitigate that, but there wasn't much sort of thought given to that particular aspect. I also am somewhat sympathetic to the sort of viewpoint that build it first and ask for forgiveness later is concerning to me. So the vegetation issue and the other matter concern me. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, or Member Cooper. Are there any other questions, comments, observations before I read the motion?
Can I ask a question? Sorry. Is it okay if I ask a question at this point?
Yes, go ahead, Mr.
Still wasn't clarification on the original building permit. Does the planning department look at the issue of backfilling the land, building up the land before the build? I can't remember if that was answered or not. 'Cause I can guarantee it was backfilled in. There's just blatant untruths going on here. That was, you can tell it was not that natural. It wasn't that unnatural hill going on there.
Thank you for that question. That question, it appears, is not a planning question, but a building department question. And I think the net result of that is not going to change the application that's before us. We're looking at the location of that garage on the property. The elevation of it, or the height of the building, is definitely something that you've identified, but it's not part of what we're trying to deal with. Did you have a comment,
Just as a
Mr.
point of
Robinson?
clarification, the municipality does have a site alteration bylaw that does deal with cut and fill on shoreline properties. It applies to the shoreline area is what the term is, and the shoreline area is the area of the front yard, so between the cottage and the water. So it wouldn't apply in this instance because this is back behind it's not gated. That's when the site alteration does apply on shoreline property.
So, do you see where that's leading, Mr. Clancy? What Mr. Robinson has said is that had this application required backfilling in order to make a level ground, that it would not be subject to a minor variance. You wouldn't need a change to do that.
So basically, because it was far enough back from the lake, we would have to get a variance on that issue.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just the location, just my own personal interest. This lake has no garages that I know of that are this close to the lake. Virtually nobody has garages there, and the few who do have it very close to the private road, so it doesn't really affect other cottages. I don't know how that got approved in the first place.
Well, we certainly appreciate the frankness on both parties that are here today, and if I could just mention what Member Ferguson had said earlier, I think there's a tremendous advantage to having site plan control in place, in that the township has the ability to enforce a certain amount of vegetation that's going to buffer your view. If this had been, as I think it was Member Matthews mentioned, if the garage had been built according to the original plan, I think your visual impact wouldn't have been different.
Well, 6 feet is, my cottage is quite close to that side of the lot. I'm sort of built on that side of the lot, and 5 or 6 feet, that's a bit of a difference, from where it is right now. And Mr. Cooper made a comment. I don't know how you can put vegetation on granite rocks right now, but So I'm a little skeptical how that vegetation's going to really affect things in a positive way, from my point of view.
Okay, thank you. Again, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will read the application. Read the resolution, rather. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves a minor variance application for A19-42 for 353 Kilty Bay Road to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit a detached garage with a side yard setback of 3.5 meters and a setback of 4.4 meters to another building pursuant to the Shoreline Residential Type 1 zone, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. B, that a site plan control approval application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and areas of new planting within the front yard in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. C, that additional plantings occur on the interior side yard in the area of reduced setback. And D, that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Our next application is number A19-44 for 4430 Go Home Lake. To the planner, please.
Our next application was submitted by Gord Hunter for lands located at 4430 Go Home Lake Shore, which is located on Go Home Lake. The purpose of this application is to permit an addition to an existing dwelling in the form of a screened porch within the existing front yard pursuant to the Shoreline Residential Type 1 zone. So here we have a location map showing the subject lands on Go Home Lake. Subject lands are currently designated residential waterfront in the official plan and zoned SR1. Here we have an aerial photograph of the subject lands here showing the vegetation and existing structures that include a dwelling, a boathouse, sleeping cabins, a shed, a gazebo, and a dock. So here is an excerpt from the survey that was submitted for the application. As you can see here, this is where the main dwelling is located, and the red illustrates where the proposed screened porch is being located. So the existing dwelling is 84 square meters in area, which is approximately 900 square feet. The proposed screened porch is 14.1 square meters, which is approximately 152 square feet, which would equate to a total proposed footprint of the dwelling of approximately 1,056 square feet. It is to be noted that the application meets the remaining requirements for a legal non-compliant structure, so it does not go over the maximum gross floor area, the maximum dwelling width, the height, and also meets all other provisions of the bylaw, including lot coverage. So here you have some photos of the subject lands. Here we have a view from the water. As you can see, the main portion of development of the property is located on quite a high rock outcrop, which is pretty typical of the Go Home Lakeshore area. Here we have a view from the dock looking up towards the existing development, so the main cottage here, and then there's a shed located to the right. So this is the adjacent property and the shoreline coming up from the dock. Here coming up from the dock, we are starting to look at the existing structure. So there is a white stake here. As you can see, this is, and it's to be noted that it will come across approximately midway through that second window towards the front wall. So here's a view from standing on the deck looking out towards the water. As you can see, there is some mature vegetation existing in the front of where the proposed addition is located. This is the adjacent lands to the north. As you can see, there's, again, quite heavy vegetation that the proposed addition would not be viewed to the lands from the north. And here is a photograph of the existing development to the rear of the dwelling. So as you can see, the cluster of development is quite tight to the rear, given the steep topography to the back of the property. So the overall proposed built form is well within the maximum lot coverage. The proposed footprint is of a modest size of just over 1,000 square feet. And through site plan control, the township will have the opportunity to perfect that existing vegetation that does exist in front of the subject lands. And staff do support the application as it does meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act. And if you have any questions for myself, I'd be happy to answer. The owner was unable to attend due to unforeseen circumstances this morning, but I will do my best to filter any questions.
Thank you, Victoria. Was there any correspondence in this application?
There was no letters of correspondence for this application.
Okay, you've already stated the applicant's not here, so are there any members of the public that wish to address this application? Seeing none, I'll bring the application before the committee, and we'll begin with Member Cooper.
I don't really have any concerns about this, thank you.
Member Demke?
No concerns.
Member Matthews?
No comments.
Member Ferguson?
I think we're all quite aware of the topography you find on Go Home Lake, and this is very typical of a very short distance and then extreme rock faces. So I think this is the best you can hope for, and I have no objections.
Thank you. Member Bocek?
As well, I think it meets the intent of the official plan. If we didn't grant this minor variance, it'd probably be the only property on Go Home Lake that isn't infringing on the front yard setback because of the topography. So I absolutely have no reservations about passing this.
Thank you. I will read the resolution. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves the minor variance application A19-44 for 4430 Go Home Lake to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit an addition to a dwelling with a front yard setback of 14 meters pursuant to the shoreline residential type 1 zone, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. B, that a site plan control application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and areas of new planting within the front yard in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. And that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? The motion is carried. We have one more application that is not subject to a public meeting because it was deferred from a previous meeting. And that application is number A19-33 for Thompson Island, Georgian Bay. To the planner, please.
So our next application, as stated, is not subject to a public meeting. We did discuss this application at the previous Committee of Adjustment meeting, which I'm sure you remember quite well. So the application number is A19-33 on lands located at 2 Islands 1660, known as Thompson Island. So the request of the application is to permit a maximum length of a finger from the main dock of 14 meters, whereas 10 meters is permitted, and a maximum cumulative width of shoreline structures of 24 meters, whereas 20 is permitted. So just some refreshing slides. The subject location is illustrated here on the subject lands, and it is located within the Cognasheen community. Here we have an aerial of the island. The island is approximately 8.5 acres in size. And so one of the main reasons why the committee requested deferral of the application was to provide the applicant the ability to update the drawing that was provided initially, which did cause some confusion at the last meeting in regards to the discussion. So this is the updated version of that drawing that illustrates the proposed dock on the shoreline. So this is an additional drawing that was provided to better illustrate, again, something that did come up in the last meeting regarding the overall amount of shoreline structures based on the size of the island. As you can see, the island has a lot frontage of approximately 400 meters. The cluster of area that the majority of the conversation dealt with last time is to the south of the island. And this just illustrates where all of the shoreline structures are located, and further defines where that 24 meters was coming from, because again, that was something that committee was asking about at the last meeting. So a few more photographs of the island. Here we have the island looking from the south, looking from the south towards the north. And this was provided, Navtronics, I think it's called. I'm not a boater, so I don't know the lingo. But as you can see here, this is the island, and the existing dock and the proposed dock area is located right here. And this, to my understanding, is considered what the main channel of traffic would be. I understand that there is still traffic that does occur around the island for more local properties. And so here we have a photograph taken from that main channel looking towards the island. So here you can see the existing development. It's difficult to see, but the boathouse is located there and the existing dock system there. From this view, staff do agree with the application that the proposed dock system would have almost the identical same visual impact that does exist from the main channel of the island. And here are some photos that you did see at the past meeting, but just to refresh your memory of the existing conditions. That's the existing boathouse there, which no changes are proposed. And it is, of course, important to note that any future proposal change to the subject lands on any shoreline in regards to the boathouse or any new structures would require future planning approval. And here you can see the condition of the existing dock. So since the application was deferred, staff have not changed their recommendation of approval for committee in regards to this application. Additional correspondence was received, which I did my best to get to you as soon as I could this morning. And there are paper copies in front of you as well for you to reference. But otherwise, if you have any questions for myself, of course it is not a public meeting, but if the chair so chooses, the applicant and their agents are here as well.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And the letters that you were referring to here, one of them was made available to us earlier. That is a letter from the planning director for the Cognition Cottage Association, who expresses his support for the application. Is that correct?
It is my understanding that the letter discusses their preference to see that the application as submitted, they would prefer to see the marine railways be taken out as a condition. I believe that was part of the letter. I don't know it verbatim. You have it in front of you, I do not. But otherwise, I do believe that the initial conversation that happened at the last meeting, the majority of that letter is essentially stating that the association does agree with how staff did interpret the cumulative width portion of the application.
Okay. And the other, there's another letter of support that came in this morning. Being as this is a closed meeting, I will, the questions are before the committee, so I will ask members for any questions or comments, beginning with Member Cooper.
Thank you, and thank you, Victoria. I do have a number of questions. I want to start out by saying that I'm fully aware that the Withers would like to have approval to have their docks there, and certainly understand the need. So I'm looking at any way possible that this could be approved. But I do have some questions because I see that there's actually not only a letter from the Cognition Cottagers Association, but also from, I believe, a representative for the Withers and contractor, John White, so there's some other suggestions being put forth that I haven't really heard any comment one way or the other, but would you be able to comment on that before I carry on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you are correct, there was an additional letter essentially replying to the Cognishing letter from the applicant's agent. Staff are supportive of the application as it has been presented and do not suggest that that is altered based on the letter submitted, but of course that is in front of committee to consider for themselves, but that is why I did not comment on that, as I was not changing my opinion that they should.
So I'll just carry on with some other, and then maybe get to some suggestions at the end, but I did take the time yesterday to go and read the Cognishing official plan, because I think the official plan actually helps to inform us in terms of total intent of our zoning bylaws, and it's pretty clear that in the official plan that preservation of shoreline vistas is top of mind. And so I think that's something we always have to keep in the back of our minds in terms of things like this. And I just for clarification, and frankly, I think it would be helpful to me and maybe others of this committee to understand frontage. I want to ask the question about frontage. How do you decide on frontage?
Sure, so through you, Mr. Chair, on a property such as this, an island that is unsubdivided, we take the furthest points of the island and it is a straight measurement from the furthest points. So in this case, it was measured across the island at its furthest points.
Like the drawing.
Yeah, no, like I got what's shown there. I was asking, how did you determine that? Because, you know, frontage could be assumed to be, you're saying the longest length is what you use for frontage.
That is the way the definition in the bylaw is written versus, for instance, you know, the way that it carries along the shoreline.
No, of course, it'd be a straight line. I get that part. But, you know, one could say the frontage that one sees heading up the channel is actually the frontage where the docks are. So that's another way of it's from a visual impact, it is sort of what you see coming down the road, as it were. So I just wanted to comment on that, but I also wanted to ask about, this is again hypothetical, but I think would be helpful for me and maybe others. If these structures were on the 400-meter side and input there, it's my understanding that 15% of the frontage can be used, and or 20 meters, whichever is less. But the 20 meters is calculated not in terms of accumulating 20 meters, but it's in fact, or the spaces in between the structures. So if we were to use the 400 meters as the frontage, I did a bit of calculating. That translates into being able to use 60 meters of the 400, which is 15%. And in those, if I get this correct, you could put in 20 meters of structures. So you could spread 20 meters of structures over 60 meters if you use that 400 meters. Is that correct?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the way that it is written is the kind of either or, so whichever is the most restrictive. So in this case, if you are correct, the 15% of that 400 meters would be 60 meters of actual structure that would be allowed, though because this is such a large frontage, there is that extra restriction of the 20 meters, and that's what caps the island off at that. So if, and I believe what you're saying is if the structures were more located along this side of the island, if that would change how it's calculated, I believe is where you're...
I'm saying that if you can use 60 meters, you could take the 20 meters as calculated down here and spread things out for 60 meters, and you'd have maybe a 10-foot wide dock, and you might have 5 cabins that are 10 feet wide or whatever. You'd end up at a total of 20 meters, but over 60. Would that be allowed or not? I'm just trying to understand.
I see what you're saying. So if The structures that are located here, if they were sporadically spread out along the island, it would still be the same calculation and they would still need a variance for that.
Right, but
Yeah.
they could spread over the 60 meters.
Yes, it would be calculated the same, yeah.
So it sort of goes to a question which I'm going to suggest that, you know, from a going forward perspective, that the Cognisheen Cottagers Association take a look at this so that there's more definition, because I have spoken to a number of the members of the original planning committee, and their understanding was not the way the township does the measurement, and I realize you go to the township bylaws and it tells you how to measure them, because that governs the entire township. But I think the Cognisheen community, as I understand it from speaking with 3 or 4 people, thought it was going to be interpreted differently. So that would be one point of clarification. The other suggestion I'm going to have is that, or make in going forward, is that this go to the planning committee as well for some comment. And it's just really to sort of take out some of the ambiguity going into the future. So that was, I wanted to get some clarifications about some of the things that we've talked about here. I guess I really would like to see, and from my perspective, in terms of this particular application, that given the amount of activity along this, what appears to be another type of frontage, that we give some consideration to an offer that was made from an agent for the applicant, that, for example, the Sea-Doo lifts would be located elsewhere or brought into that particular area. I also note where you show 4.3 meters, sort of in the south-west side of the island, the 4.3, there's more activity on the shoreline there, which is, you can't see it from there, but from the other picture, the back one, that bay, it's sort of a little bay there. There's, I think, I think 2 boats pulled up on shore there. So it's another area of activity, shall we say, which might be considered from a visual impact, impactful. So I'm throwing that out as another suggestion. The final question I have for you, if you could go back to the more zoomed in picture, just from a technical perspective in terms of measuring things. I'm sort of seeing that one measures in a straight line more or less across here, and yet we're measuring the front of the boathouse is only 4.3 meters, when in fact from a visual perspective it's actually more than that, because it's turned. So why do we measure it that way when it's turned?
Sure. So
the visual impact is in fact greater.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the way that it is measured as defined in the bylaw, so that's how we applied it to this application, is that it is measured parallel to the shoreline in a straight fashion. So as you can see where the current water line is, that would be considered parallel, whereas here, this would be considered the parallel measurement. That's how it is written in the bylaw.
So that's another maybe nuance that we can take a look at from the planning committee perspective and maybe the Cognisheen area. So anyway, those are some of my comments, and I would like to see that if we can do something to mitigate the impact, because this is really quite a bit wider than, in effect, from my visual perspective, than 20 or 24 meters. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Cooper. Mr. Robinson?
Just as a point of clarification, and it may be helpful in terms of the process. There's been an application submitted for a proposed variance. The Cognisheen Cottagers Association has provided some suggestions in their letter from yesterday that outline what they would consider appropriate in terms of the removal of some structures. There's been a response this morning to that from Mr. White, the contractor for the proponents, in terms of what they would consider appropriate. It may be beneficial for the committee to hear from Mr. White to understand exactly what they would be willing to potentially compromise on from the original application, so that as we're going forward on dealing with further comments, we've got a clear understanding of what's being asked for right now. It sounds like they may be asking for slightly less than what the original application was. So that may be helpful. I just put that out there.
We'll continue with the questions and comments and come back to that. Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Member Demke.
Yes, I was going to ask the question, I'm not sure where the Sea-Doo lift areas are and how much that would save.
That's,
Okay.
yeah, so they're just located,
Victoria, if you could go to the next one, you'll see that one of them is way over to the side.
Yeah, way over in the right-hand side. So I'm just wondering if, how much impact that would have on those, to the overall application. Would it actually then meet? Because I couldn't figure out how much we were going to save by doing that. It sounded like a simple compromise.
through you, Mr. Chair, of course, the functionality, and again, the owners and the applicant's agent are probably best to speak to the visual impact and the intent of what those structures are used for. My understanding is, you know, in the letter, the marine railways that were asked to be removed, those are primarily underwater and they don't have a consistent structural use for them, whereas the Sea-Doo lifts, is that the right term, potentially may have more of a permanent visual impact. So yes, maybe the removal of that in comparison to marine railway, sure, but I would like to default to the more experts of that, if you don't mind.
Okay. Thank you, Victoria.
Okay, that was my main question. Thank you.
Member Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Victoria, if you could go back to one of the new slides there where it showed, yeah, that one. So, sorry, back one. You've got, can you reference for me what that 18.5 meter thing is? Because it really doesn't seem to add up with the shoreline structure.
No, of course. So through you, Mr. Chair, it did come up in the last meeting through the initial comments that were received by a member of the public. And in that letter, they were questioning where the sleeping cabin on the subject lands, if that should be considered part of the cumulative structure. So this image is just showing that it is in fact 18.5 meters away, so therefore it's not included in the calculation.
Okay. So, and it's my understanding that the 1.5 meter on the left side of that and the 1.5 meter on the right side of that, those are the marine railways. And they're sort of a permanent thing to pull the boats out, but there is no, I won't say, yeah, are there any structures over the railway, or do they just pull them up on shore?
It's my understanding, again, they can clarify if the chair so chooses to let them speak, that there are no permanent structures on those railways. They are just used for temporary when they pull the boats in.
So if they were, as I know they do at times, park a hovercraft on the west side of the, I'll call it the waist between the two, because there's no structure there, and they have the ability just to float it up on land, that's not considered shoreline structure of any sort?
Correct, yes.
Okay. I too support Member Cooper. I think, you know, they're in need of much better docks than what they have there currently. If you, from a visual impact, from my standpoint, you're getting 21 meters or 20, what do we got? 22 and a half meters instead of 20 meters at that south clustered. And I'm, you know, for a couple of meters and their requirement and the size of their boats and their permanent residency there, I think it's a fine application now. And I must say, I just want to thank Mr. White and the Withers for bearing with us as we got to the bottom of some of these questions that the public asked for, and I hope that if this goes through, it hasn't really delayed your construction.
Thank you, Member Matthews. Member Ferguson.
Well, I would recommend that we do hear from Mr. White, with your permission, Mr. Chair. But I also want to recognize the fact that if they're looking for 24 meters and the requirement is maximum is 20 meters, it's a difference of 13 feet on a very large island, good-sized island, with lots of shoreline to it, and so I'd be inclined to support it.
Thank you, Member Ferguson. Member Bocek.
Well, I was one of the ones that braved a ride up to this property to have a look at it, and to tell you the truth, I missed it. And when I was coming back to find it, I really didn't notice the dock network following the main channel. I had to pull in and actually look for it and look at it. So I don't think the view is that obtrusive. I mean, if you're driving your boat and you're looking for it and you want to look at it, then you would see it's there. But really, there's not much impact as far as I'm concerned. I did look at, I had originally, when it was here last month, I had no concerns with the cumulative width. I made that very strong comment that my concern was how big the shore platform was going to be and how it was going to be attached to the shore. With meeting with the contractor, Mr. White, a couple of weeks ago, and getting a better description and drawing of what that's going to entail, and my site visit, I now have no reservations about supporting this application.
Thank you, Member Bochek. And unlike Member Bochek, I am quite familiar with Thompson Island. I go by there quite a bit, and I do share your opinion. The docks and the existing docks that are there are not an issue at all. There's very little reason to go through there unless you're heading up to Bone or something like that, and you're on the other side.
Or musky fishing.
Well, musky fishing. But it's not an impact to the, let's say, the general public. The majority of the boats take the main channel, and as you illustrated, Victoria, in your picture, your ability to see those docks and any boats that are attached to them from the main channel is, yeah, there you go. It's pretty restricted, and there's very little boat traffic through there. You see that there's a navigation marker there, and there are some areas that would not be very friendly to inexperienced boaters. So there's not a lot of people, I don't think, that would travel through there. And again, like some of the other members, I didn't have an issue with the first application. We're down to the area here of whether we were going to do something with marine railways or sea-doo lifts. That's such a small part of this whole existing impact at the shore. I can see the advantage of having those marine railways. If you live on an island, you need to take those boats out of the water for the winter and store them, and I don't know of a better way than having a marine railway to do that, which leaves you the marine or the sea-doo lifts. And there's 4 posts sticking up that are about 4 inches square, over the dock, and I can't see where that would be of a concern with anybody. If the sea-doo was on it, you're looking at a sea-doo. If it's not, you're looking at 4 posts. So I have no reservations for approving the application as it sits, but again, that's my opinion, and we all have them. So is there, just before I read the resolution, I would ask the committee members, does anybody here feel that they need a question answered or some additional information from the owner or his agent? Yes. Okay.
I'd just like to say that I think some of us said we would like to hear what was being proposed by the agent for the owner with respect to the sea-doo lifts, and I recognize they're not particularly large, but if they were located perhaps somewhere between the docks and the boathouse, for example, there'd be less shoreline impact. So I think it would be worthy hearing what they were proposing. Thank you.
Okay, I do, sorry, Member Demke, you had a question?
Yes, I understand what Mr. Cooper's saying in the previous questions, but I think Member Bochek has already talked recently, and I don't know if there's any other further information based on that conversation he can give that might allay the concern there.
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't think it would hurt to hear from the contractor. I think the consensus of the committee is that we're satisfied, but it, you know, I can't speak for anyone else, and I think if there is some alteration to the existing plan or application that was proposed, it in no way would hurt to hear them out. So if you're looking for an opinion on whether we should hear from Mr. White, I would say yes. Even if one of us wants to hear from Mr. White, then it should be heard.
I'm fully prepared to ask the Mr. Withers or Mr. White to comment, but if I would prefer that we had a specific question for them, you know, rather than a random comment. You know, is there a question that needs some clarification or answer? And Member Cooper?
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty clear, but can give up the in-water sea-doo lifts, that says give up, and so my question is, I want to know what the specifics are.
Oh, so relocating would be
It might be
an alternative.
relocating, I don't really know what this means, so I think it's a bit
Okay, so then let's direct that question then to either of you two gentlemen who wish to respond. If I could ask you to come to the table and identify yourself.
Morning, Mr. Chair and committee. My name is John White, White Contracting and Barging, Honey Harbor. I'd like to thank you for re-reviewing our application and so on. I'd like to thank the Cogdasheen Association for a lot of work. I know they did a lot of due diligence in the last couple of weeks and so on. Trying to
John, if I could just hold you up there a little bit, appreciate your comments, but I think we're going to hit you with a specific question.
Yes, sir.
And there was a letter, actually an email that was printed out here this morning from yourself that has to do with the sea-doo lifts, and I think you can get the reaction from the committee. There's a question as to the visual impact of those sea-doo lifts and whether you or your client would be open to making some sort of change to those sea-doo lifts to soften that visual impact.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The intent, should this application go forward as submitted, would be to remove the sea-doo lifts. They would no longer be required. And that was part of the intent of this system, was to have all of their in-water systems and stuff together so they would no longer require those. So that visual impact would go away.
If I could ask you then, John, so if we're looking at the right or the left side of that drawing, are you having a couple of those floating sea-doo stations?
Yes, it would be accommodated into the dock system.
Excellent.
So
thank you. We did. Thank you, Peter. Okay, are there any other questions or comments from the committee members?
Just only a question for my own clarification. So if the sea-doo lifts were removed, we're down to a 1 meter variance?
So, Miss.
No?
No, that's the railways. That's what was confusing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that would still include moving towards the application.
Mind if I'm
Victoria.
quick comment? So through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing that up. So to clarify, the sea-doo lifts are not included in that 24 meters. So regardless of the discussions here, and of course getting clarification from the applicant that those would be removed, the application in front of you would still remain the same in regards to the variances requested.
Yeah, just to finish then, what we're really saying is it will help the visual impact side
Exactly.
of the whole thing, which is, seems to be an issue. That's good, thank you.
Member Cooper.
Ditto.
Okay. Okay, I think we're all on the same page, so if I may, I will read the resolution. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves the minor variance application for A19-33 for 2 Island 1660 Georgian Bay to zoning bylaw 2014-75 to permit a dock with a maximum length of a finger with a main dock of 14 meters and a maximum cumulative width of shoreline structures of 24 meters, pursuant to the Cognizine Shoreline Residential Island Zone, subject to the following. A, that approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. B, that the proposed dock system be built on the current high water mark at the time of installation, and photos be provided to the township by the applicant and/or agent of such prior to the closing of such building permit. And C, that approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structures. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you very much, Mr. White.
I'm sorry, this is unrelated to this particular application, but one of the previous ones, there was a site plan agreement put in place, which was the right thing to do. I went outside with the gentleman who was the neighbor. He didn't understand what a site plan agreement did for him as a neighbor. When I went out in the hall and kind of explained my understanding of how the site plan agreement works, he seemed to feel a lot better understanding that his rights were being protected by the township through that site plan agreement. And in the past, we've made site plan agreements and made property owners aware that these were going to be attached to certain applications. But in today's case, I don't think that we explained well enough to that gentleman, because he seemed to be in a much different demeanor on the way out the second set of doors than the first set of doors. It just, some days, and we went through it here today with this application. It took a lot of time to understand what the wording in the letter of the law actually means and how we need to apply it. And I think we need to clarify sometimes for one another a little bit better, so that we all are on that same page, and that's difficult to do. It's not easy. I'm glad I don't work with the planning department, because I don't know how they do it. Thank you.
No, we appreciate your comments, John, and you know, we strive to do that at the expense of overdoing it. You know, nobody wants to sit and hear the explanation of the, you know, the site plan control after every application. But your point's well taken. You know, maybe at some point we should maybe speak to the applicant before they leave and give them a better idea of what's there, or ask them if they understand and have them come back for it maybe. But appreciate your comments. Thank you very much.
Chair Hill, I think something to be noted here is that the past chair used to always encourage the applicant to get together with our planning staff and review what the site plan agreement entails and the cost associated with it. One thing we failed to do is, if there is a neighbor in opposition, is to include that neighbor with the information of what a site plan agreement actually is. They're kind of left to walk away with no idea of what's happened. Yeah. So perhaps the planning committee, which the township has, could address that as one of the issues to make it more freedom to obtain that information to the neighbors.
Is there a document that you know of that outlines what the site plan agreement entails and the cost?
Jamie, you could probably better answer that, but you know. It's just an interesting conversation.
Just check with staff here. We don't have like a site plan guide or anything. Typically, someone would contact us or visit the office, and we'll walk them through the process that's associated.
But an explanation of what the site plan agreement actually is, so that when an applicant walks away, they're going to come in and speak to our planning department about what's in the site plan agreement, but the neighbor's left with no idea what's in that site plan agreement.
And I think that was the major problem today, that this was the neighbor. I mean, the applicant is told about it, but the neighbor wasn't informed, and that fell through the cracks.
Do you need a part-time job, John? You need a part-time job? You could stand out there and tell people?
The planning department a lot of times does put in our report that they have talked about site plan review with the applicant.
Exactly.
Right? So to John's point, it's the guy next door who was affected that didn't understand it.
If I could just set these questions aside for a moment, we've got a couple little bit more things to check off here, and I would like to pursue that a little bit further with the planning department. But again, thank you, John, for highlighting that, and we will definitely address that with the planning department. Thank you. All right, so what are you doing every second Friday of the month? Adjournment, or the meetings, approval of meetings?
The minutes?
Yeah.
And adjournment.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the, have a resolution to approve the minutes of the September 13, 29 Committee of Adjustment meeting.
I think you have a motion.
All those in favor?
You have a motion for that?
I do.
Yeah. You said you had a resolution for it. You have a
Well, be it
motion?
resolved. Not motion. All right. Would
Somebody
you,
was listening to you, Mr. Chair, so.
may I have a second, Mr. Bocek, Member Bocek? All those in favor? The motion is carried.
We're just toying with you, Tom.
I'm easily
This is,
toyed with.
this is the point where we can fund it at your expense.
I have a motion for adjournment. I'll read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment does now at 11:47 adjourn until November 15, 2019 at 0900 or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you.
Peter, is our meeting 2 o'clock in the boardroom?
Anyway.
Or in here?
Jamie. Me, yeah. Well, I'm asking for everybody, but
I'm gonna do my best.
We did talk to them. She's organized.
what I'm thinking of, if somebody is asked to sign a site plan agreement, is it customized to each application?
So we have a standard one